In the coming years, the United States Treasury will get $14 billion less in tax revenue because of a sweetheart tax deal with General Motors, better known these days as Government Motors. Sounds a lot like crony capitalism to me. Here to discuss are my freedom fighters, Fox Business Network reporter and my colleague Dennis Neal, and the Agenda Project founder Erica Payne, and Reason Magazine's editor-in-chief Matt Welsh. Are you surprised that the government would give a deal like this? Remember, this is using pre-bankruptcy dollars as a carry-forward write-off.
Yes.
For post-bankruptcy income.
Now, for many years, companies that lose a lot of money are able to do tax loss carry-forwards into future years. So I got no problem if GM is being treated the same as every other company. I don't want to punish them for the bailout. But in this case, when you read the papers on it, you see that GM actually should have given up all of that benefit because it filed for bankruptcy and it walked away from $30 billion in debt. And that's the penalty you pay.
Okay,
but they're not paying it.
That's the point, Erica. When you go through bankruptcy, you can't take the losses that you had before bankruptcy and use them against your taxes after bankruptcy unless the government owns 80% of your stock, right?
Well, you know what I mean? The fact is you're 100% right, and I usually hate government subsidies, and I think half the reason we're in a lot of the mess that we're in is because we've given subsidies to big companies who don't need them. This is a little bit different, though, in that this decision about what they were going to do with the past losses was part of the entire deal that they put together. And so what you want to look at is, was that entire deal successful? And GM is 30,000 cars away from being the #1 car seller in the entire world today. So that was a successful
that's because people holding $30 billion worth of bills to GM didn't get those bills paid, and people who loaned money to GM and became secured creditors had their loans wiped out because the bankruptcy court changed the rules because the government wanted to be a majority shareholder of GM. How is that even remotely fair, moral, or constitutional?
It's not legal. It's something that people forget, but George Bush, our previous president, tried to pass through an explicit bailout for the auto industry and General Motors. It failed. Congress did not pass it. And so then afterwards, then President Obama said, fine, let's just use TARP. It is illegal. In addition to that, what we have now is that the IRS, in a very quiet maneuver in 2009, said any company that we bailed out and then went through bankruptcy doesn't have to follow by the usual bankruptcy laws that everyone else does. And the reason behind that is obvious. They want to be able to sell this as a great story for the American taxpayer. It's not. It's a disaster, and they're lying to us about it.
Your guess is right. This is political cover. They are still fighting a rearguard action to defend what was a bad deal for debt holders, what violated contract law. It's bad policy.
Do you really think that this was a good deal for the taxpayers, for GM to be 30,000 cars short of a majority?
Can I tell you?
They lost on billions that they owed.
Listen, this is a fantastic deal. We almost lost an entire industry. GM was in the tank.
Yes. Should industries that mismanage themselves fail and somebody will pick up the parts that
well, you know what? We did it for the banking industry, and we didn't have the executive comp rewriting. We didn't have the rules change that they needed in this case, and I don't think in many cases. In this case,
let me get Matt in. Doesn't this just prove the futility of government bailouts, Matt? How do they decide who to save and who to let die on the vine? Who to make pay taxes and who to say you don't have to pay taxes?
Not just the futility, but the perennial nature of it. Where do you stop that logic? We've just heard, hey, they did it for the banking industry. Why not the auto industry? Okay, well, why not crossing guards?
He preferred that the banking industry fail and then the auto industry fail. That's the question.
There's a difference between bankruptcy and liquidation, and it's a question of economic ignorance on people who think that bankruptcy equals liquidation. It does not.
We did not bail out the banks so that banks would survive. We gave them temporary money, $700 billion, so the entire worldwide financial system would keep functioning, and they paid back all but $50 billion of it, and the other 50 is when the Obama posse came in and gave it to hundreds of little tiny banks that weren't a threat to the system.
All right, so the latest thing that the government wants to do to the banks is it wants the banks to partially forgive the principals on loans, on mortgages that the government has given to homeowners who owe more than their property is worth.
$20 billion.
Will this move help the housing market? Because every other government marketing scheme hasn't helped at all.
Hell no, it won't help the housing market.
First of all, I have a huge problem with how much intervention there has been in the housing market, and I believe that led to a huge bubble that caused a big problem. I think we should eliminate Fannie and Freddie. So let's start there, where I agree with a lot of the people that we're talking to tonight about this. The problem with this is that $20 billion is either going to be levied against them in fines because of the bad way that they went about doing the mortgage foreclosures, or they're going to forget a loan.
Matt, so here's what the government is going to do. Just like when Joe Biden said to BP, give us $20 billion or we'll take it from you, and BP said, to whom can we make out the check? The government is going to say to the 5 largest banks in the country, write down your mortgages. Tell these people to whom you loaned money, who can't pay you back, that they now owe you less than you loaned to them. Question, will any of the banks have the chutzpah to resist this government shakedown, or will they go along with it just to get the FDIC off their backs?
Oh, they'll go along with it in a heartbeat. I mean, you see the size, the concentration of the 5 largest banks in this country throughout the last 3 or 4 years during this financial crisis that started with mortgage finance, by the way. They have a better market share now than they did 3 years ago. So of course they're going to go along with it, because it's a classic case of corporatism.
Look,
really, they're just going to... Go ahead.
One big problem, guys, is that this is in some ways a further backdoor bailout of Wall Street investors, because the buyers of mortgage-backed securities that kind of pay based on the mortgages being paid on time, they aren't going to lose $1 in this. Instead, it comes out of the bank's pocket. The bank did nothing wrong. The comptroller of the currency said very few people were pushed out of their homes, and we forget that everyone whose home is underwater, they bought a home they could not afford, they don't deserve a bailout.
Just because a home... Hang on, time out. Just because a home is underwater, by which we mean more is owed on it than it is probably worth in the market, doesn't mean that the government needs to interfere, because if you still have a job and you're still paying the mortgage and you don't intend to sell that house, this is just a paper deficiency. It doesn't affect your ability to pay. It doesn't affect your lifestyle. Question, why is the government getting involved where its services aren't even needed?
Where the government is getting involved in this case is to say to the banks, you have been proven that you behaved badly in the situation. I totally disagree with your assessment that the banks have done nothing wrong.
The U.S.
Lloyd Blankfein paid himself $43 million the year that he destroyed the economy. This is about homeowners, yes. It was very much so about the banks also.
I'll give you the last word. Where will this end, or will it not end until the government owns everything?
Like a lot of things right now, this is going to end when people stop being willing to buy U.S. government bonds. It's going to impose some very ugly austerity on people who have not, since 2007, when the whole thing began, they have not let market prices fall so that there's a market solution to a housing crisis, which is let people sell and leave their houses.
Got it. Matt Welsh, Dennis Neal, Erica Payne, it's a pleasure. Thanks very much for joining us. Up next, more guns, less crime. Renowned gun rights expert John Lott wants to let kids carry guns on campus, concealed, because he says they'll be safer. He's right, and he's next. There's a big battle going on in the Lone Star State over guns in schools. Texas lawmakers will soon decide if licensed faculty, licensed staff, and licensed students can carry concealed handguns on college campuses. This has reignited the public debate over the Second Amendment. Supporters say the bill would allow for self-defense. Opponents argue that it would create more violence. Joining me now is a renowned advocate of concealed weapons laws, John Lott, author of the terrific book, More Guns, Less Crime. John, welcome back to Freedom Watch.
So, great to talk to you, Judge.
Make the argument, if you would, that students would actually be safer if they carried concealed weapons on college campuses in Texas or anywhere today.
Right, well, it's the same argument for concealed carry any place. And, you know, the fears that people bring up about things that might go wrong are the same fears that were brought up when each of the 40 states that now have right to carry laws were originally raised. And it's been proven time after time that fears about people using these guns improperly or causing harm to others simply haven't come true. The people who go through the process to get a permit tend to be extremely law-abiding. They lose their permits for any reasons at hundreds or thousands of 1 percentage point. And Just as you can deter criminals with higher arrest rates or higher conviction rates, the fact that a would-be victim might be able to defend themselves can also deter criminals from engaging in attacks.
All right.
And if they do attack, it's the safest course of action to take.
We all know what happened at Virginia Tech. We all know what happened at the Appalachia Law School. The students were allowed to have guns, but not in the classroom, not in the school, in their cars, where they didn't have the time to get them. Isn't it a fair and reasonable argument to make that if some student were armed and knew how to use the gun, that the monsters who killed people would have at least been stopped before the full extent of their killing actually came to pass, and might have been prevented from killing anybody?
Right. Well, I mean, what you find is that, there's literally many dozens of cases where permanent concealed handguns have stopped these multiple victim public shootings. Over a quarter of the public school shootings, the K through 12 shootings, have been stopped by citizens with guns well before the police were able to arrive. But, the research that I've done with Bill Landis at the University of Chicago Law School, we looked at all the multiple victim public shootings from 1977 through 1999, and what we found was that determined how many people got hurt in these attacks was the amount of time that elapses between when the attack starts and when somebody's able to arrive on the scene with a gun. The longer the amount of time, the more carnage that you have.
All right. How do you address the argument that a lot of people make? And I agree with you fully, and my hat is off to you. You've done pioneering work. You are one of the greatest defenders of the Second Amendment in the United States today, John. How do you make the argument that a lot of people make? Wait a minute, you're going to let college kids carry guns? What happens when they're on their 15th beer?
Right. Well, again, people who argue about these things always bring about hypothetical things that might go wrong. We don't have to worry about hypothetical. We have a lot of data on this. We have 71 universities right now that allow students and over 21 or whatever the age is in the individual state to carry permanent concealed handguns. These bans are relatively new. Most of the colleges only started having these bans in the early 1990s, about the same time that the federal government started debating the so-called Safe School Zone Act.
My guess, John, is that this will pass in Texas, and Texas will be a safer place as a result of it. We only have a few seconds. What do you predict?
Well, I think that's right, and I think it'll probably also pass in Florida, and there's some other states that are considering this. You can see after states have adopted right to carry laws, there's not been one state that's even held hearings on trying to repeal those laws. And that's because they've worked so well, and that the fears that people have brought up haven't come to pass, and they're not going to come to pass here either.
John Lott, it's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Up next,
Thank you.
The plain truth on how entitlements enslave our society.